Overwatch 2, is it a true sequel? Since the second version of Blizzard's multiplayer shooter was unveiled in 2019, there have been lingering questions about it, which grew more intense when it was announced that it would completely replace the current Overwatch rather than coexist with it. Now that it's in our possession, I can say that while it's less of a reinvention and more of an evolution of the intense, nuanced, and brilliantly colorful team-based battle that made its predecessor so enjoyable, it still adds enough new elements that it feels like its own unique game and not just Overwatch 1.5. The more important question is how many of those changes are for the betterment of the experience once Overwatch 2 becomes available to the public as a free-to-play game. After playing the game for several hours, I'm still undecided as to what is an improvement and what isn't. I don't want to sound too unfavorable because the original Overwatch was one of the most entertaining video games I've ever played, so even a step down from that was still a lot of fun. Simply said, Blizzard has raised the bar for itself in this situation. The fun team-based hero shooter gameplay that made the first Overwatch such a big smash when it debuted in 2016 is still present in Overwatch 2. Its 35 heroes' character designs are incredibly diverse, and it is easy to see how each one of them feels different to control and is brimming with fun. Everyone's weapons still feel amazing in the hand, and the sounds they make and the tiny visual glow-up just serve to amplify the exhilarating delight of combat. Any game afterwards hasn't really captured its highs and lows, from the joy of those last-second tactical switch-ups to the anguish of a teammate refusing to go on to the objective at a key moment. That rush was the lifeblood of Overwatch, but sadly it withered as the game grew old toward the latter of its run due to a lack of fresh content and an overabundance of shields that resulted in a tedious meta emerging. However, some of the adjustments made in this sequel serve as a defibrillator, reviving Blizzard's hero shooter. The major change in Overwatch 2, outside of the fact that it is a free-to-play game, is the switch from a 6v6 to a smaller 5v5 configuration. It's a significant ideological shift with immediate, palpable effects. It comes with both blessings and curses. It fully drags Overwatch 2 out of the stagnant meta swamp its predecessor found itself in over the past couple of years, but also deprives itself of some of the luster of its satisfying team play. This is in addition to the potential horror of finding out you were the 6th best Overwatch player out of your friends and finding yourself the odd person out. Currently, teams only have 1 tank character, 2 damage characters, and 2 support characters. This means that only one of the 10 available tank heroes can be used at a time, as opposed to Winston and Reinhardt and other primary tanks who control space and act as barriers between you and your aggressors in earlier versions of Overwatch, such as Zarya and Roadhog, whose job is to be more aggressive and disrupt the other team. With the release of Overwatch 2, that divide has become less obvious because all tanks are anticipated to take a more active part in the conflict. This is a challenge because you still require the defensive anchor when delivering a payload, awkwardly splitting the tank's function. When only one is allowed, it falls largely on that player's shoulders to lead the team and take the bulk of the damage, even if it is also their role to defend the goal. Due to him being one of the few available potential guardians at the period I played, Reinhardt was frequently chosen. It raises the issue of how off tanks currently fit in. D.Va is without a doubt one of my favorite characters to play as, but choosing her in Overwatch 2 makes me feel somewhat bad because I leave my support teammates defenseless and exposed while I fly off in my neon pink mech to hunt down a Widowmaker. This makes Doomfist's switch from damage to mobility tank even more perplexing because it feels like there isn't much of a place for him in the rotation right now. Simply told, a lot of the tanks still have the impression of being created for older versions of Overwatch rather than the current one. On the one hand, this dramatic change in team makeup is an exhilarating breath of fresh air and, crucially, something important to distinguish Overwatch 2 from its predecessor. It encourages aggressive play and provides 1v1 clashes greater significance than before because it is a true test of talent. Even while it does mean that my favorite Cassidy is no longer equipped with his reliable flashbang, the reduction of stun abilities that stop you in your tracks or disrupt powers undoubtedly improves the flow of a match. However, Overwatch 2 seems to be straying from the tactical teamwork that gave the game its original edge. Simply put, it seems that the transition to 5v5 has cost some of that wonderful team-centric charm. Despite the fact that it appears that attritional shield battles are, happily, a thing of the past, perfectly timed ultimate combos, such as when a Junkrat Riptire advances on a bunch of defenseless enemies caught in a graviton surge, are now even more uncommon. Rather of being drawn-out tactical fights, matches frequently feel more like groups of deathmatch skirmishes. The effective reworking of numerous characters to conform to Blizzard's new 5v5 philosophy. Orisa, one of Overwatch's most resilient defensive characters, has experienced the most conceptual change in terms of how tank players are expected to play Overwatch 2. Just by looking at her new ability set, her abrupt transition from a dependable anchor to a roaming damage dealer is obvious, but it is felt even more on the battlefield. In order to do the maximum damage with a primary fire that has been modified to deal more damage at closer range, the whirling javelin spin speeds up mobility and encourages charging toward enemies. Contrary to how she was typically deployed, Orisa in the original Overwatch sat further back and served as an anchor point for other players to encircle and fire upon their opponents. The removal of her energy shield in the form of a football net is the clearest indication of this philosophical shift. As the number of barrier users in the original Overwatch increased over time, anger with shield-heavy metas increased. Too frequently, when you'd settle down for a fun evening, Bastion and a Torbjorn turret would appear, safely covered behind what seemed like many shields. These initial changes to Overwatch 2 obviously address this, and happily, the significantly decreased number of deployable barriers makes those days of the multi-shield feel like a distant past. Of course, in addition to the reworks, there are also new heroes joining the team, one from each class, bringing the total to an astonishing 35. Especially so when you consider the original launched with just 21. The newest damage character, Sojourn, has a rapid-fire railgun and provides Soldier 76 with a novel and practical competition. She doesn't come up with anything new, but her quick skid and super jump maneuvers combined with her devastating secondary fire can be lethal. While Kiriko, a ninja healer, shares parts of her techniques with Genji, a damage-dealing character, she actually plays more like Moira, rushing into the fray to help allies and occasionally delivering headshots with a kunai. Junker Queen, an aggressive tank, is my favorite of the new additions so far. Her powers really shine when combined as you swing your axe, stab someone with a boomerang-like dagger, and kill them with a shotgun blast. All three of these heroes are as well crafted as you would anticipate given Overwatch 2's heritage and are brimming with personality thanks to their distinctive aesthetics and engaging voice acting. All of these new heroes are enjoyable to play even if none of them really alter Overwatch 2. I could easily see them fitting into the original. In actuality, the roster does appear to be reasonably balanced at launch, which is quite an accomplishment considering managing 35 different high-powered characters with 6 skills apiece. Rarely have I seen one hero completely dominate a game, with multiple heroes excelling at different times. But with Genji still slashing his way to plays of the game across my screen 6 years later, certain things seem to be just inevitable. In addition to switching to 5v5, the sequel also adds a brand new mode called Push. A robot resembling Baymax pushes a barrier through a map on behalf of whatever team is nearest to him in what is effectively a tug-of-war game. Similar to Overwatch's iconic escort mode, except with each side attempting to push the robot to the opposing team's spawn location as opposed to one team continuously defending and the other continuously attacking throughout the whole match. It does a great job of narrowing the conflict such that both teams are working toward a single goal, but it still feels like a balance needs to be found. When things aren't going your way, it's incredibly difficult to turn the tide in Push, similar to a real-life tug-of-war. I've also very seldom, if ever, seen a dramatic comeback or last-second hold in Push, which is a thrill that is so characteristic of Overwatch's other modes. The maps that come with Push are all excellently designed, with the customary mixture of meandering roads and congested areas that Blizzard has always successfully incorporated into their arenas. They are all expertly made, with sound and art blending to produce minute nuances that add up to charming wholes. The fact is that Overwatch has always been a master at map design, with the occasional outlier, Paris, I'm looking at you. The sequel's 6 new features are no exception, with my current favorite being Paraíso, which is inspired by Rio de Janeiro. Its beautiful, carnival-themed payload, which you travel through to reach Lucio's club, exemplifies the delight that Overwatch 2's maps can produce when they successfully combine gameplay with character. Not all of the maps from the original game have been carried over to the sequel, unlike its protagonists, who are all present and accounted for in some capacity. This is due to the Assault, or 2 control point, mode being removed. I know they had their problems, but as someone who doesn't compete in esports, it's a little sad to see them depart. It's also upsetting that these maps aren't even included in quick play. Many people have warm memories of places like the Volskia Industries and the Temple of Anubis. It's unfortunate that Hanamura's balconies, where I often spent high noon, have been destroyed by the passage of time. However, I am a little concerned that new heroes will only be made available to those who purchase the premium battle pass. If a new hero is introduced who is particularly potent or essential to the evolving meta, then someone can choose to buy their way up the battle pass tiers, something we've seen, inadvertently or not, happen with Activision and the introduction of Call of Duty weapons to Warzone. This model pushes that pay-to-win door slightly ajar. However, this problem is fairly navigated by the fact that none of the heroes will be playable in competitive play for the first 3 weeks of the game's existence. On the other hand, it provides the more casual player something to strive towards and a purpose to continue playing, apart from the continually entertaining action. For novice players, this sense of progression is further emphasized because it will take them about 100 matches to progressively unlock all of the original Overwatch heroes without paying, even though they will all be free for them. It's a strategy I don't believe is fundamentally negative because diving right into a squad this big may be overwhelming, and any reduction in the learning curve is good. Of course, the story-focused player versus environment modes are my most eagerly awaited seasonal edition and won't be available until 2023. Since the sequel's announcement, I've been most anticipating the promise of additional Overwatch backstory because it has the potential to differentiate it from its predecessor. It's exciting to think about a regular stream of story-driven missions expanding on the world that Blizzard so masterfully laid the groundwork for years ago. It's a long cry from searching comic books and animated films for tidbits of backstory. Even though none of it was ready in time for launch, it's something I still eagerly anticipate. Therefore, if the pertinent inquiry concerning Overwatch 2 is simply whether or not it is an entertaining game, the immediate response is yes. It's still a fundamentally excellent hero shooter, it's just not quite at the pinnacle of its powers right now. Perhaps over time, as the community offers input through our numerous wins and losses to come, and Overwatch 2 lives up to the promise of its recently restored underpinnings, that brilliance will be recaptured. Make sure to stay subscribed for my final review when Overwatch 2 launches next week. Thank you for watching.